Good day, fellow adventurers. Last time I told you fine folks you were funner than bubble wrap, and that's hard to beat. Y'all make me giddy. You make me think this channel actually has a chance. And according to YouTube analytics, I have 9 recurring viewers. And you, my friends, are the whipped cream on my pie. And if you ever saw me with a bowl of whipped cream, you'd know that means a lot. Welcome to Dresden's Tale, episode 75. This is season 3, volume 3, chapter 71 in our tale of friendships under siege. This is the sort of story that needs heroes, and we have plenty. At the center stage is Dresden Fane. He's the leader of a fighting group full of fierce friends and faithful to family, faith, and even more friends. They are the warriors of the Stone Clan, locked in the struggle of their lives, but the only thing they fear is breaking up the band. I'm Lewis Nichols, proud to be here, glad to pass on the tale weaving its way through my imagination. I have no patience for the real world. Welcome to my idea of peace and solitude. I'm the guy who wrote this crazy thing, a project spanning 2 decades and a whole cartload of Word documents. Thanks to YouTube, I now have a reasonable way to pass it on to you. Oh, my friends, we are running out of time. Only a few episodes left before the end of the season, and that means just a few more intros and outros to fill your heads with fascinating tidbits. First, a confession. I made Liz and Orn roll CODs. Cash on delivery? No, something far worse. Chance of death. In a campaign setting, such things would be determined by grinding out the battle. In typical fiction, the author makes an informed decision based on what's best enabling his plot. Well, like I have a plot. It's a dangerous world out there, folks. Sometimes a character death is planned. Poor old Merlin never got a roll. Neither did Leith. From now on, rolling's going to become pretty normal. Do you hate that? Leaving the fate of your favorite characters up to just a dice roll? You can influence the lives of these characters. Just leave a comment. Tell me your hopes and dreams. You won't always get what you want, but I will listen. Fun fact number 2. Any of you hear of Anjing Luka? Sure you have. It means cute dog in Indonesian. Why is this relevant? Strangely, it's a browser term that will occasionally lead viewers to this station. Confuse the heck out of me. But it's got to be the brief images of Bart and Elle that I show in the transitions. Interestingly, that means YouTube is using image capture and weighing the results at least as high as the hashtags I include in my uploads. I'm not sure how to manipulate this, but it is quite the little factoid. It's not exactly Big Brother watching, more like a nosy uncle. Alright, on with the good stuff. 6 days have passed, with the Iterians still occupying the western parts of the city. Here in besieged Brave Rock, it's Thoth's 24th day, 2,053 years after the fall.
Tribulations 132. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes the whole clan to mold them into a warrior.
It had already been a long day. Not that days mattered anymore. You fought, and there was always a fight somewhere. Dresden hadn't been there yet, but one of the southeast perimeter forts was breached a day ago. Somewhere in the keep's interior, where the passageways were walled off by corpses, the combatants were separated by a single brick wall. But neither side was sure they were ready to rip it down. For now, Dresden and the warriors around him were on the offensive. He smashed the skull of a kobold, then spun to take a goblin in the ribcage. To his left, an unknown brother was going toe-to-toe with an Iterian dwarf. To his right, Macelius was jabbing wildly at some sort of pigman. The small courtyard was full of Iterians and Kelds alike in a wild mixed brawl. "Where are the others?" "I don't know. I think they went left. We went right." Macelius raised his shield to protect himself from the splinters of a shattered catapult stone. "We might be in the wrong keep." With archer support from a nearby tower, they managed to hold the courtyard for a time, But when 200 fresh Itarians joined the fray, they fell back into the stables. The place reeked. A slain horse, gut split and putrid, made it hard to breathe. But it kept the Itarians at bay. What do you mean they're on keep? Why else would our cats be suppressing this one? How do you know they're ours? It's granite, not sandstone. Well, I'm not leaving. I like it here. Nearly an hour passed when a pair of bloodlords appeared, Governor Eldrin's own personal fighting group. After killing 40 Itarians and magically creating a wall of bones, they gave the command, "We're pulling back." Dresden wanted to say something on the contrary. Perhaps, but we were just thinking about redecorating. But he was too tired, and his humor never worked anyway. Instead, they just ran as fast as they could across the no man's land, back to their lines. About the time Dresden's legs were finally ready to fight again, it was time for another retreat. For the first time, Itarians were entering the eastern city en masse. Celts fought for every inch. Dresden bashed a human in the knee. Liz was beside him now. Sometimes he thought she tracked him through some natural magic she wielded without even knowing. She struck his enemy in the chest, pushing him back into a defensive ditch. They gave up a few feet, ducking behind the next line of Celt warriors. Dresden nearly went down when a bogey caught him by the leg. He twisted, dragging the beastman left and right, fighting for his balance. He managed to duck another, going for his head, but one got hold of his waist. The line fell back, but he didn't move. Magical flame darts peppered his adversaries as some unknown warlock tried to help him. Two fell, but another had hold of his shield. He fought to hold on. It must have looked funny. He might have laughed, even in the face of death, but his mirth evaded him. Bogies had him by the belt buckle, the ankle. It felt like one had a grip on the back of his jacket, and there was still one on his shield. A dead canine flew into the approaching crowd, knocking back a pressing Itarian with a bushy beard. Liz nailed the heretic's Tagar friend with a right cross, and a flurry of crossbow bolts protected his left. His boondoggle with the bogies continued. For every one he knocked off, two more grabbed hold. "It's going to sting!" He didn't realize the warning was for him until his muscles seized. It felt like his eyes were going to pop. Two of the bogies did. Not just eyes, but black streaks ran across their exposed skin and blood gushed from the tips of their fingers. "Run!" Along with Liz, he ducked behind a cart and let the others fight for a bit. "What did you do to me?" he asked the Day Terror warlock. "Can't tell you. If I did, I'd have to kill you." "You almost did kill me." "Yeah." "You never gave me your name either." "Can't tell you that." "Say hi to May." Dresden turned, and she was in his face. Grabbing his leathers, she kissed him. The elation of the magical healing coursed through his body, even as her tongue wormed into his mouth. Her facial hair tickled his face. Her hand released and grabbed him below the belt. "I'll find you again someday," and she was gone. "Shush," he told Liz. She grabbed him and gave him a quick kiss for herself. Not a word. She rose, taking her with him. The open ground between the shopping district and the rock was a chaotic field of thousands. Warriors who knew that they were locked into a war of extinction. One day, only one people would survive. The gods demanded blood, and they would have it. Maybe this war gave the LXXV an advantage. Maybe it would be the first step for a total Itarian victory. All Dresden knew for sure is that he was on a side, and it was his lot in life to kill anybody that fought for the other two. This is what it meant to be a Celt, plain and simple, with zero ambiguity. With the rock to his left and the market district behind, Dresden fought to keep the Itarians in the open. The Celts still controlled the keeps here, and storms of arrows, stones, and spells crashed down from the rooftops of the heights. They owned the high ground, and the Itarians died in droves. A terrible grating screech sounded, and the Celts cheered. Lightning blasted a hole in the Itarian ranks, forming a landing zone for Greg and his wyvern. They butchered the enemy. Retaliation. The chief of the river dogs was struck by spellfire. Not a quick blast, but a funnel that seemed to take hold, slowly cooking the hero. In turn, Celt teams jumped into the area where the Itarian mages fired from. Dresden considered it himself, but could barely find a moment to breathe, much less form a glyph. He drove his hammer into the armored shin of a minotaur, and again into the shield. He spared a glance for Greg. Free of the flame, he stood on his mount, directing strong fighting teams into the midst of the enemy. He could feel the Itarian mass heave under the pressure. Like one great beast, it hesitated, considered flight. Dresden screamed like a devil and struck at the Itarians in front of him again and again. It wasn't single combat, but his arm against the entire living mass. Then, disaster. He couldn't move. Where the bogies had just tried to pin him down, some spell froze him in place. His body betrayed him, giving him just enough control to stay erect. Even that didn't last, as Liz and the rest of his allies forced him back. It was worse than the bogies. He could hear the fight from his useless, fetal state. The great iron wyvern shrieked. The whoosh of spellfire erupted behind Keld lines. He heard the screams of his burning fellows. "We're pulling back." Liz didn't bother finding out if he could move yet, but grabbed him by the belt loop and carried him into the main streets of the town. She dropped him somewhere along the way. No doubt she believed he was still paralyzed, but in a safe spot. He could hardly blame her for wanting to get back into the battle at this critical point. Dresden found his way to a barricade of toppled wagons and piled barrels. "They'll come soon. This is the last barrier keeping them off the rock." The female elf that said it took a second to heal him. It didn't restore him completely, but he thanked her just the same. He could hear the fighting, 1,000 little battles on the streets of the district. Every remaining keep must have been catching the hells. One big siege devolved into a dozen. He truly felt blessed. This is what it means to be Keld. It was a fine sentiment until the next wave of Itarians began to gather down the street. More than enough to overwhelm the band of defenders. They exchanged insults. He didn't speak their language, of course, but he'd been told they equated a lack of hair with weakness. Dresden stood up and patted his head. "This is the bald-headed dwarf that's killed a dozen of you today, and I'm going to kill you and everyone you know." It was time. Dresden reached for his potion of strength and felt the broken stub of a bottle still secured to his belt. He started to laugh. "What's wrong with you?" the elf asked. "I'm just tired of running, that's all." "Me too," a minotaur exclaimed. "These hooves are made for standing ground, not giving it." "Well, fuck it then. Lead the way, big fellow." The elf pulled up twin hand axes. The force of the Kelds left their defenses and charged. It seemed to Dresden many of the enemy were not comfortable in battle. Could it be they were more battle-weary than he was? It had been a long day and a long siege before. Perhaps they had just never been properly exposed to the joy of combat. Often they turned away from the tip of a blade when it came close to the face. They seemed more interested in avoiding a wound than inflicting one. After a minute of battle, two lay crawling for cover, and the dwarf had his sights set on another. More Itarians arrived, some of them clearly veterans, but Kelds were arriving now too. Once again, Dresden was at the center of the struggle. "I'm not running," his new Minotaur friend called. Just for fun, Dresden screamed at his foe. "You will die here. This is stoner ground, and thus sacred." Not a single Itarian turned to run in fear. As the waves of steel and bone crashed together, the Minotaur yelled out, "Hey, I'm a Black Flag. Can I have some ground too?" You can have the whole street if you like." Dresden struck low, and his horned friend went high. He lost the number of knees he'd cracked and shields he'd smashed. He grew numb to the carnage, even as the Minotaur fell. All he could do was sigh. "If I knew your name, I would tell your tale." The battle was rough, but turned when a trio of paramilitias showed up, with specters and ogres among them. The victory was short-lived, though, and a few hours later, they fell back once again. The day was catching up with the young warrior. Dresden was feeling himself become useless. His legs and lungs ached. Healing no longer had an effect. Battered and bandaged, he smirked. It wouldn't make much sense to quit now. They'd all be dead soon anyway. He could rest then. Most of them were together in the end. Cormac laid up against the front door of the Historia, too wounded to do anything more than give advice. In the chaos, Dresden had managed to link up with a number of his friends and acquaintances. Krillech was there, along with Orn and Donald. Liz was back, and Kira was there. The cliche of it all. It was time for one last charge. Dresden knew it, but found he wasn't so eager to die. The entire city was a giant mixed melee now. No one held anything. A little further up the hill, just barely in view, Greg and Maxine, along with the remaining militia of Agamar, battled at least 1,000 Itarian troops. "We can flank them," Cormac pointed out. Everybody laughed. Dresden never got the chance to prove his bravery. From somewhere nearby, but just out of sight, a horn sounded. Its long and eerie call went on for much longer than a breath. That it was magical was of no doubt to anyone, but what it foretold was unclear. Dresden spotted the first of them. Across the wide street, a beefy troll stepped out of an alleyway. It backhanded 2 Itarian soldiers. Both flew 15 feet before landing in a big heap. The troll was followed by 2 smaller ones. Behind them was a handful, and then even more. Dresden couldn't count. They were soon flooding out of the alley by the hundreds, if not more. The exhausted dwarf raised his shield when one came near, but the monster had no interest in him. "I saw it. It was horrible." Macelius told the story for the 5th time. "The governess, Chief Greg, Maxine, and a bunch of others, they were all there. It looked like they'd hold, but just barely. Then at least 200 more Itarians, veterans. They came at them. Some of them were top-notch seasoned warriors." Dresden thought maybe Macelius was missing his calling in the Church of Heloi. He wondered how much of the tale was really true. She looked at Greg, right in the eye, as if needing an okay. Then she lifted up this horn, started to blow. But it wasn't like that. It was more like the horn was sucking air out of her. As it sounded, she wrinkled up, just like she was becoming old. When Greg helped her away, she could have passed for 100 or more. All I could hear her say was something about the great irony of it all. Then the trolls were everywhere, and even the big Itarian toughs left. The Itarian General Storch stood and supervised the army's entry into the city. The fight would go on for hours yet, but he felt confident in victory. That feeling was shattered as the sand shifted against him. Word came saying the heretics released thousands of trolls against them. Even now he could see them coming out of a breach in the north wall in pursuit of his infantry. He shook his head and prepared to take on the threat himself. But by the time he donned his helmet, he realized the problem was much larger than any one man could handle, at least while he was alive. Making the faithful decision, he said the words and touched the sacred splinters of the lost chest. As the trolls came, he spread his arms wide and let them rip him to shreds. The ones who feasted on his flesh became a shade of red, then turned on their brethren. As the battle wore on, troll slaughtered troll, and his army limped back to their camps. Hence was saved the 3rd Army of Iteria. The siege continued. Is Dresden's world high fantasy or low magic? Are the rules soft or hard? I like to think of it as low-key squishy around the edges with a shiny diamond center. Boy, that was quite the battle. I thought our hero was in trouble a few times. Alright, well, not really. We've got a lot of the tail left, and we can't go losing our main man. Oh, yeah, and well, obviously Liz. She made her COD roll. But we didn't see Orn today. I hope he's okay. You have probably realized we only have 1 episode left in an epilogue. And then some end of the series wrap-up stuff. And yeah, we got a few episodes left, but the meat of it, it's about done. Let me know what you're hoping for in the comments. The future's already forged, but I'd be curious to see where you hope we go from here. Don't expect too many big revelations, but I'll see if I can at least tie up a few loose ends. In the meantime, thanks for stopping by. I'm glad that you chose to spend a little time with me. Do the stuff, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.